So today I'm going to be taking a look at the Nomos Metro. This is a watch I have been wanting to look at for quite a while. Nomos did actually lend me this watch, so they reached out. I got to handle it for about a week or so, and then I had to send it back. I don't have to say anything nice about it. They don't have to review the video or anything. These are all my thoughts, my opinions, so just keep that in mind. So we have a diameter of about 36.8, lug to lug of about 43.3, height of 8 millimeters, and a lug width of technically 16, but it fits 18 millimeter straps pretty well. Some other general specifications for this watch: we're going to have the Nomos in-house caliber DUW 4401 movement beating away in here. This does use Nomos' proprietary escapement, which is actually done in blue, which is kind of hard to see, but if we zoom in a little bit more, you will be able to see it better. Obviously, display case back here, sapphire crystal on the back, dome sapphire crystal on the front with a very gentle dome. We do have 30 meters of stated water resistance with a regular push-pull crown. And lastly, the watch retails for $3,780 directly from Nomos. So starting off with the dial of the watch here, and we're probably looking at one of the most interesting parts about the watch. It is a design that I think is uniquely Nomos. It doesn't really look like it's necessarily copying or playing off any other watch designs that exist out there. It is very much something that is homegrown in a sense, and I think looks very unique. Looking a little bit more generally, we do have this kind of silver-ish, white-ish dial, depending on the angle, depending on the light. It does lean a little bit warmer than it does cool, so it has those kind of subtle yellowish undertones to it. You can see every 5 minutes we do have circular markers on the dial. At the 12, 3, and 9, you do have these larger markers done in this kind of mint color. Then for the other markers, we do have a little bit of a smaller dot, and also it's in black instead of this mint color. Out in the seconds track, we have a continuation of the circular design language, and then every 5 minutes, we have it actually written out in numerals, the 60, 05, 10, 15, and whatnot. I do think it's fairly clean. There's surprisingly a lot of space on the dial, despite having a power reserve, a sub-seconds, a date, and then kind of so much text on the dial. It's actually partitioned out very well, and it doesn't feel overcrowded by any means. The Nomos on the 9 o'clock here is a very interesting point. I do think there's really not anywhere else to put it just because the positioning of this power reserve, and I do think it looks pretty nice on the dial. It not only kind of makes the design unique in that aspect where you don't have a lot of watches with the actual brand name over here on the 9 o'clock, but to me, I think it just does blend well with the design language and the harmony of the dial elements. One thing I think they did really well with this dial here is the use of color. Sometimes Nomos can go a little bit too fun with color or introduce colors that I think clash with the rest of the watch, but here even the aspect of the orange hand doesn't really feel out of place. You have that subtle yellowish warm tone coming off the silver dial that really plays in with this orange hand in my opinion. And then you have that slight little bit of orange in the power reserve whenever you're kind of running out of power. That pops out as well, so it ties in all those elements together. One of my favorite parts about this dial, and it's something I kind of didn't notice completely at first, is the handset. Not only have they a very unique syringe style shape to them, but they are actually oxidized black. So you can see obviously they contrast very intensely against the dial. It also pairs perfectly with the standard black shell Cordovan strap. But to me, it's just visually different. It not only is very legible, but as you move it, you do get these kind of lighter silver tone, maybe gunmetal grayish tones that do come out. So it isn't just a pure black that's kind of lacquered or painted. It has a little bit more life to it. And I just really appreciate that they've tried something different and it actually, as executed, works so well here. I think had the hands actually just been regular stainless steel or maybe even blued, because they are so small, it might have been a little bit more illegible than it is here. I do really think they did a really nice job with this dial, introducing all these circular shapes and somehow making a trapezoidal date window not feeling overly out of place. It all works really well together. There's a surprising amount of depth for such a really thin watch. There's so many cutouts in the dials, different finishes, layering from the date window disc to the power reserve disc. It is just a really interesting dial to look at, and let's take a closer look. So zooming in on the dial here, we can see how interesting this dial finish is up close. We have this kind of blasted, they call it a galvanized finish, which really leaves this really cool texture, very metal looking feel behind. And this contributes to the color depth. Of course, at some angles it's more silvery white, at some it's more silvery gold, and it has that depth of color to it, surprisingly. Because it's not just a plain brush dial or a plain lacquer dial or just something that is more commonly seen at more affordable watches, this is a dial finish that I typically don't see on most watches, and it comes to life. We can see that same finish is carried out even in this power reserve indicator, obviously just in a little bit of a different color, and it looks really well done. Looking at the printing of these kind of circular hour markers, I think it is done pretty well. It has a little bit of three-dimensionality to it. I would like to see it maybe a little bit more thickly applied, but it's not bad as it stands. If we look around the dial here, there really aren't any misprints or splotches or ink missing, and to me it looks really well done. Looking at the Nomos lettering, it's obviously done in the same font, same styling. This is again an area where I'd like to see a little bit more three-dimensionality to the printing. It would have just added a little bit more depth to this otherwise very flat-looking watch, or a flat-looking dial, or at least flat-looking printing on the dial. But as it stands, again, it's not badly executed. Focusing on the hands really quickly, obviously the hands aren't the best finish. To be fair, I think this is more of a review model than a full production model. But that being said, it isn't the nicest hand set there. You do see some very harsh blemishing towards the middle of the hour hand there. Because of this finishing, at most angles it does kind of blend away into a full black hand. And of course, this is nothing you'll ever see from wrist view, but it is there. The center pinion is pretty nicely capped there, and it has no blemishes on it, whereas I have seen blemishes from other watch manufacturers, so good on Nomos. And then moving into this minute hand here, we don't see as many blemishes as we did with the hour hand, which is nice. It's a little bit better of a QC'd item, and I just do really love the shape of this hand. It gets very, very thin out towards the edge, which is pretty difficult to do, keep it structurally sound there. And I just think it is a really unique shape, really interesting. Focusing for a second on the sub-seconds track, we do have this concentric circling, which really is a nice break of pace from the rest of the dial, and this kind of orangish, reddish hand, depending on the angle you look at it, that pops out really nicely. Focusing on the date window, we can see there is a lot of depth to it. It actually does sit quite a bit below the cutout. The date window is also nicely color matched. Of course, it's not the exact same dial texture as the rest of the dial, but that can be forgiven. I do prefer maybe this smoother dial disc. Maybe just it becomes more legible than had it been textured in any way. And the printing of the numeral is actually done very well too. Overall, pretty good dial. Really not many areas where the QC is lacking other than, of course, the hands there, but that can be forgiven, I think, at the price point and for how well the rest of the dial is QC'd. So moving on to the case of this watch, and while maybe not as interesting and unique as the dial, it is still very different and something we don't really see much in modern watches. You have this very defined circular case, which is pretty simple. There isn't any crazy finishing to it. It's all high polished, and it really has this kind of monoblock feel to it, or maybe just monoblock mid case and then the case back put on top of it, or put on bottom of it really. But you can see we have these very defined wire lugs that make this case shape and this style from Nomos, this Metro line, unique. It's something we don't see a lot in modern watchmaking. It's also just not something we usually associate with the dress watch. It's usually more for, you know, World War watches or typically field watches, but here I think it actually works really well, and I think adds just a very unique look to the watch. Not only does it make it, in my opinion, wear a little bit smaller, but you also get rid of that kind of typical Nomos gap from super long lugs. These are pretty compact. They do have a nice curve down to it as well, so it actually wears very close to the wrist, which at the end of the day it doesn't overly need because it's already a very thin case. This watch does wear extremely well on the wrist. All high polish everywhere. We have a very thin bezel, which I do like to see. It makes the dial very expansive, and it makes it appear visually larger than you would expect the size, but the footprint is also smaller than you would expect for the size because of these wire lugs. The crown here has a very good knurling on it, has a good grip. The winding is smooth and there's a nice action to it, which is good because this is a hand-wound watch. We of course have Nomos signed on the crown there. And again, what's really fun about this watch in particular is as you wind the watch, the power reserve has a movement to it too. It has a little bit of life to it, and it's unique and also patented by Nomos. One thing I will note is the crown only has one position. You pull it out, the seconds hand does stop, but there is no quick set date. You can kind of cycle it all the way through and kind of have this little cheating quick set function. You go through to the next date, you cycle back a little bit, you hear a click in the movement, you cycle forward, and it changes the date again. So although it's not the best thing, at least there is some form of changing the date rather than cycling all the way around the dial a bunch of times. But it would be nice for them to try to integrate that quick set date functionality into the movement itself. To be fair, if it adds some thickness or it is too monetarily or mechanically complicated, sure, that's okay. As it stands, it's a little bit of a hassle to, kind of live with. Taking a quick look at the movement here, it is very nicely finished. We have this striping, we have this swirling on the gears here, and it just is a pretty movement to look at, especially for the price. You have the heat blued screws, you have the jewels that pop out, there's a lot of color going on, you have a little bit of gold from the gears and the balance spring underneath. I do really like the gold lettering on the movement here as well. Adds a little bit of just, I think, class to the movement. One note I would say is it's a little odd how small the movement is compared to the case. Obviously that's not unique to this Nomos, but it's just one of those facts where it's kind of exemplified by the fact you have this very large outer portion of the case back that's fully high polished with no text on it. They're kind of not using that real estate in any useful way other than this tiny little and very small Metro naming down here. So I think they could take a little bit more advantage of that. They can state, quote unquote, the water resistance and made in glass huta and all that good stuff on the back here. And that would make it maybe not feel as expansive, as large, and as at odds with the smaller case back. But what is nice is as you wind the movement, you can see the gears turning, and that's a fun little way to, interact with the watch. So moving on to how this watch wears, earlier I was wearing my Zodiac here. And here we have the Nomos sitting on my 6.5 inch wrist. And I think, at least from my point of view, this fits perfectly. It's a really good size, just diameter wise, but it also is fairly short lug to lug and sits really well within the bounds of my wrist. Because it's thin, it really just melts into the wrist. It's very comfortable. There's no really sharp edges. It doesn't poke or prod in any way. And the shell Cordovan strap is just really comfortable, really conforms to the wrist nicely. It doesn't really need any time, or it doesn't need much time to break in. And to me, it does pair perfectly with the watch itself, especially because of those blacked out hands. It's one of the very few OEM strap options that I think is pretty perfect, and you don't really need to mess with it. One thing I didn't note is I don't know whether or not they use any anti-reflective on the crystal or not. You do definitely get some glares and reflections, but it's not too bad, especially because it's more of a silver dial. It's not like an inky black or anything like that. It's not something I overly noticed, but just wanted to mention it. It does sit pretty much inside of the wrist, and the way the lugs turn down, the strap really sits very low and plants the watch really nicely. So overall, it just really is a pleasurable watch to wear. I think it looks great. Even if I move it up on my wrist a little bit, I have closer to like a 6-inch wrist here. Very proportional, very nice on my wrist. So this is a size that a lot of people can wear, and I think it's a really good size just for the design language, for the way the watch wears, the thinness, everything packaged together comes together pretty harmoniously here. And then taking the strap off, what's nice is we do have these quick release spring bars, but you do have a little bit of trouble getting it out of the lugs. And the reasoning is that Nomos provides you an 18mm strap, but it's really a 16mm lug spacing here, which is a little bit odd. The bar that they include, this quick release bar, is actually a 16mm bar inside of an 18mm strap. And it kind of gives you the idea of like, oh yeah, this is kind of meant to be on an 18mm strap, and it kind of hides a little bit of that lug or wire lug situation. To me, I don't mind it. I think it's a fair idea because I think on a 16mm it looks a little bit odd. And you can obviously do this with any strap because this is almost like a functionally integrated spring bar in a sense. Like you can have almost a 19 or a 20mm strap on here and just kind of squeeze it in. This is how the watch looks with 16mm spring bars applied, and it becomes an almost kind of a fixed spring bar type watch. And if you use it with NATO straps, you can use a little bit of a larger NATO strap than you would expect it to. This is going to be 19mm, and it works really well with the watch. Here we go, we have a 19mm NATO. You can see it pretty much covers the lugs, kind of lug edge to lug edge. I think pairs pretty well, just looks proportional, and is kind of meant to be on a little bit of a larger strap. This NATO is by Crown & Buckle, by the way. This nice kind of blondish color really plays off the subtlest yellow tones you get off the dial. Adds a little bit of color, but not too much. And really, I think is a perfect combo for this watch, especially because when you put it on a NATO, it's not too thick of a watch by itself, so it doesn't really add any height to it. So it is still a very comfortable way to wear the watch. It helps the watch wear a little bit more casual, a little bit more fun, and not as serious as maybe the Cordovan leather is. Next is a combo that I wore this watch on a lot, this green Perlon. This is just kind of generic, I believe. I bought it off of Amazon. I'll have a link down below. Really plays well off the greenish tones, the mint color that they went with for the accents, and to me makes the watch a lot more fun. Nice deep rich color from the Perlon, really complementing the dial. To me really does bring out the green tones that to me I didn't overly notice, especially on the black strap, but here they pop out and really stand out to you. Going in the other direction and moving the hands a little bit so you can see it, we have this nice oxblood colored leather NATO. Again, plays off the tones of the dial. You have these orangish colors from the power reserve and the seconds hand that really pair well with the watch, or with this watch strap in particular. To note, this is actually an 18mm strap, so you can kind of see it doesn't fill out the lugs as perfectly as the 19 did, so I would kind of say lean towards 19, but the 18 does look good too. This doesn't wear as close to the wrist as the Natos and Perlons do, so just keep that in mind. You could obviously go for like a red Perlon or a red Nato and get the similar feel, but just wanted to try out this leather one. And here we have a nice strap from King Leathercraft. This is 18mm, so just used those 16mm spring bars and kind of moved it over. It is kind of hard to fit a 19mm watch strap. It's a little bit too thick and you have to do a little bit too much pushing, so it is possible, but you're gonna kind of probably potentially ruin it a little bit for some of your other watches. So I would say go 18mm when you're looking at leathers, and then probably go 19 when you're looking at single pass straps. Looks pretty good with the brown tone too, definitely plays it down, makes it a little bit more casual. This really is a somewhat of a strap monster despite having other colors and tones on the dial. To me, looks good on almost every strap I've tried it on. And lastly, while this cementish grayish color definitely works on the watch, obviously this is not a combo that I enjoy. This is a genuinely 16mm watch strap, so clearly it fits lug-wise, but you can see it definitely looks a little bit off balance. It looks like a very large head with a little bit of a too weirdly small strap. And I don't know, maybe that is a look that will visually appeal to you, but it is a little bit odd, so I wouldn't recommend going down to 60mm. I would say 18 is really the threshold. And just because why not? Here it is on my wrist. It honestly isn't too terrible when you're wearing it, but like again, it does give a little bit of a feel of this strap is a little bit too thin for the rest of the case body. But I mean, it makes a statement at least. So pros and cons of this watch, and I think one of the biggest pros just to start with is not only the size, but just the uniqueness of the case and how it fits on wrist. It is or at least one of the most circular watches I've ever experienced. It does wear really well on the wrist, and it is interesting. It's very much all dial. It has almost no lugs, so it has good presence, but it doesn't feel too large at any point. For my wrist size in particular and how I like my watches to wear or to look, it fits me pretty perfectly. So not only do I just think it's an amazing wearing experience, but the fact is that they kept it so simple, so bare bones, no frills for the case, that they just executed that simplicity very well. My next pro for the watch is something I really never noticed online or from the photos or from other videos really, or I guess I just didn't pay good enough attention. And it's the fact that the hands are done in this black oxide coating. It is, to me, super interesting. It's not something I've seen ever on a finish before, or whether it be markers, whether it be hands, whether it be anything. And it does complement perfectly, in my opinion at least, with the stock strap. The color tones work really nicely. It gives the watch a little bit of playfulness, but not too much, a little bit of seriousness, but not too much. It's a perfect balance for this watch design, and it's something that I think is almost classic Nomos. It's something unique, it's something different, a little bit like traditional watchmaking, but with an edge. It works really well here. And my last pro for this watch is the fact that, and this is kind of true of almost all Nomos watches, is that it is very original. It's a dial design that's not really riffing off of anything else. It's completely Nomos thought up. It's completely Nomos originated. And there's value in that, there's interest in that. And it's really a breath of fresh air, not only just in terms of design, but in terms of the watch collector, the watch buyer. It's something that doesn't exist anywhere else, and that's refreshing. I do really love how they use a handset that I've personally never seen before, and I don't think it's been used many places before, if at all. I'm not 100% sure. Again, dial layout, super unique. The fact that they're pretty much doing, well, I mean, technically it is a full in-house movement, you know, maybe based slightly off the ETA 7001 caliber, but they have their own patents with it. They're making 95% of their components in-house, which is pretty insane, especially at this price point. There's a lot to value if you like that artistry, if you like that aspect of watchmaking, and if you're the type of person who wants that originality, who wants something that's not an homage to anything else, that wants something that is, in a sense, new and something that hasn't been done before. This is what Nomos is doing. This is what this watch is doing. Now moving on to cons, and while I don't have many, I think one of my bigger cons, and this may not apply to everyone, is that the dial itself can be a little bit simple and a little bit flat. Even though there are elements of the printing that has three-dimensionality to it, there is something that's been done over multiple layers, I don't think there's enough of it. I think there should be thicker printing. I think it should pop a little bit more off the dial. And I understand that this is a Bauhaus, a simplistic, minimalist dial design, but I think you can do minimalism with some flair in a sense, you know? And that's just kind of what I like personally. I like things to be simple, but I like them to still have some depth to it. It's both literally and figuratively. Do I think the dial's done badly? Not at all. And to be fair, there are some QC issues, and the main one I saw was on the hour hand. But at this price point, it's kind of to be expected, and it's not so badly done that it's blatantly in your face or it's unforgivable, or I'm sure if you even brought this kind of issue up to Nomos, they'd take care of it. But digressing a little bit, I just do think the dial can be improved slightly, especially with the printing aspects. Another choice that I think is odd, and I don't know if I'd mark this as a con, but it's the fact that they have that 16mm true lug size. They put it on an 18mm strap. They state that it's 18mm on the website, but it's a 16mm spring bar that's used on the watch. And I don't know if the reason it's done is so you can have a little bit of that overlap on the, lug bar, so it kind of catches into the strap better, or they wanted like a more of a hybrid between a true wire lug and a more traditional lug. I'm not 100% sure. I just think it's a little bit of an odd choice. Maybe state it better on the website. I don't know, because if you were someone who bought a bunch of 18mm straps to fit on this watch, you would have been a little shocked, a little bit surprised, and if you wanted to use other spring bars, spring bars that came with 18mm watches, would have fit. You have to use the 16s. So a little strange, a little odd, just something I think I'd mention. And my last con for this watch, and I don't think it necessarily applies to this watch in particular, I guess it's this sect of the Nomos range, is that there's not a lot of variety. There's a lot of variety in this Metro range in the sense that they have three-handers in different sizes, but with this Power Reserve model, it's just this variation. There's no other colors, there's no other patterns, there's just not more. And to be fair, I think that's odd. This watch in particular, I think, has been in the Nomos catalog for a couple years, and it's one of those things where unless it's just not popular, I don't see why it wouldn't have been iterated on. If I had to buy the watch, I don't think it'd be this exact version. I think it'd be some kind of version of this watch. They do I don't know if they call it midnight, I forget the exact color style terminology off the top of my head, but they do a version of the Metro in this kind of anthracite-y, blackish gray color, and I would have liked to see that in this Metro Power Reserve version. I think that would have been cool. I think that would have been a little edgier. I think that would have been something I would have preferred for my collection. But as it stands, this is the variation we have. And it's not bad, it's very versatile, it's interesting, and maybe this is the only way they see the design. This is their perfection of it. But as it stands, I think there should be more. So final thoughts on this watch, I enjoyed it immensely. I actually liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I liked how it wore a lot more than I thought I would. And I actually liked the dial a lot more. I'm not a big silver dial guy. I'm not super into there being tons and tons of colors on the dial. But this Nomos executes it well. Typically, I'm not even a big fan of like the orangish style hand on the Nomos watches, that kind of sub-seconds hand. And it works fine here. I had no issues with it. It is a model that doesn't wear how I would say you expect it to. It's different. It has wire lugs. It has a unique shape. It's all dial. So this is something I would, if you can, try it in person. Because it might surprise you. It might just grab you. It might be interesting. And I do really love how this wore on a Nato, and that's something I didn't expect. So there's all these aspects of this watch which are something that you can't grasp online, or something that you wouldn't have thought of to begin with. And they make this a very cool, very unique watch in this price segment in watch collecting, I think. Is the price a little bit high? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. When I first heard about this watch, when I first looked through the Nomos lineup, I did think so. It's $3,780, which is not cheap for a watch by any means. But this is an in-house caliber. This is something that's made primarily in-house. This is something that's finished pretty well. And this is not a Power Reserve, but this are complications, which include the Power Reserve, that are unique to Nomos, or at least unique in this variation to Nomos. So there is a lot of R&D. There's a lot of time and attention and detail that was taken to create this watch. So I don't think the price point is undeserved. But I do think it's something that takes a little bit more thought than, let's say, that they're $1,600 Nomos Club or something like that. There is a uniqueness, there is a charm, there is just something different about this watch, and I do enjoy that. This watch absolutely will not be for everybody. It leans dressy, it leans simple, and not everybody vibes with that, and not everybody can reconcile that into their watch collecting or watch appreciation habits. But I do think for those people who lean that way, for those people that find an interest in this watch to begin with, you possibly will be pleasantly surprised, because I came into this watch lukewarm with a slight bit of curiosity about it, and I left it being like, I kind of don't want to give this watch back. It's cool. I would be happy to own this piece. It's not the perfect piece. There's areas it can improve, but it's compelling. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Thank you as always for watching the video. Let me know where I was wrong. Let me know where I wasn't. And I hope you got something out of it. I'll see you in another one.